On this Friday night, a long-awaited wish for Indigenous people finally becomes a reality. A turning point in the historic visit to the Vatican.
I am very sorry.
The emotional reaction.
I'm happy.
And new expectations. The new urgency to get people out of Mariupol, while rockets rain down on a Russian oil depot. Kyiv recovering and rebounding.
We see now so many cars.
Plus, the Canadian lawyer trading legal briefs for Ukraine's battle lines. And growing attraction.
I know in a weird way that's absolutely what happened.
The rising popularity of Indigenous culture tourism.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Colleen Christie.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Indigenous delegates who arrived in Rome earlier this week for historic meetings at the Vatican got what others have worked decades to achieve: an apology from the Pope for the abuses many suffered in Canada's residential school system at the hands of the Roman Catholic Church.
I ask for God's forgiveness, and I want to say to you with all my heart, I am very sorry. And I join my brothers, the Canadian bishops, in asking your pardon.
The apology that we received today is absolutely historic and so meaningful to so many people. But we've all been very clear that there's so many steps that we still have to take.
And those next steps could come here in Canada, as Pope Francis also committed to visiting Indigenous families in their homeland, possibly in July. With more on what was said in Rome and reaction to the Pope's historic words, let's bring in our Europe Bureau Chief, Crystal Goomansingh, for more. Crystal.
Colleen, Indigenous delegates were in tears when Pope Francis apologized, but he went further than that, acknowledging the broken family bonds along with the cultural loss and identity. Steps away from Pope Francis, a fancy dance performed with enthusiasm and pride. Not too long ago, this was an unacceptable display of culture to be unlearned at residential schools, often at any cost.
I am very sorry.
I had tears today when I heard those words. Because like I say, I hoped for it. I prayed for it. I prayed for it. But never expected to live and see and feel it to happen on my birthday.
Holy Father, may the Creator of the Great Spirit bless us today.
The Pope says he was enriched by his encounters with the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations delegates.
I also feel shame, I'm saying it now and I'm repeating it, sorrow and shame for the role that a number of Catholics, particularly those with educational responsibilities.
I didn't think I would hear him say how he felt shame for and guilt for what the church did to our people.
The Pope's words today were historic, to be sure. They were necessary, and I appreciate them deeply. And I now look forward to the Pope's visit to Canada, where he can offer those sincere words of apology directly to our survivors and their families.
We at ITK look forward to working with the Canadian Council of Bishops and the Vatican to not only plan for this message to be brought to Canada and to our people in our homelands.
Just like the dedication showed by Métis fiddler Alexander Custerrock, the next steps will require hard work. Chief Wilton Littlechild used the term reconciliation. His fellow delegates agree.
The moment is like when you're going out there in the snow and you see fresh moose tracks. That's the feeling that I have, because there's a possibility.
The Pope presented one member from the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations delegations with a bronzed olive branch, a hopeful sign of peace and reconciliation going into the future. As for other survivors of residential schools, they will get an apology from Pope Francis in Canada potentially sometime in July. Colleen?
Crystal Goomansingh in Rome. Crystal, thank you. And as Crystal mentioned, the Pope's apology included recognition today of the broken family bonds and major loss of culture caused by the Church. Here's more of what the Pope had to say.
Great harm was done to your identity and your culture. Many families were separated, and great numbers of children fell victim to these attempts to impose a uniformity based on the notion that progress occurs through ideological colonization.
His words were a surprise to many, but they come after a long, grueling battle from those who've been searching for accountability for decades. Eric Sorensen looks at reaction here at home and the hope for what's to come.
It took so long to get to this point. The shame, the sorrow, the clear admission of wrongdoing by the Catholic Church. Pope Benedict and all the popes before him refused to apologize until Pope Francis did.
The Commission has received...
It was the courage of survivors of abuse and their families that would not let decades of mistreatment just fade away.
I'm happy that, finally the Pope has apologized.
Evelyn Korkmaz was a child at St. Anne's Residential School in Ontario. She only wishes the apology had come sooner for relatives who've passed away.
It's a very heavy burden of shame for a survivor to carry.
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women, and recently the discovery of unmarked graves, almost certainly children who attended residential schools, have not only shaken Canadians, but brought harsh international scrutiny to the Canadian government and the Catholic Church.
The world is watching this story unfold here in Rome.
Successive prime ministers have apologized.
We are sorry.
And Justin Trudeau now welcomes the Church's contrition.
Today's apology is a step forward in acknowledging the truth of our past in order to right historical wrongs, but there's still work to be done.
Indeed, Indigenous leaders say the warmth we saw in Rome is tempered by the cold reality that crimes were committed, starting with the European doctrine that justified the taking of Indigenous lands centuries ago.
The people that have done these crimes have to be accountable. And also the system that set it up have to be accountable.
Next steps include the expectation of millions of dollars in compensation, a return of lands acquired by the Church, and a full investigation of abuse that includes access to the Vatican archives.
What took place in residential schools...
Marie Sinclair, who chaired the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, says it's important for action to be taken, but the apology is also a gesture of historic consequence.
Very important to survivors. It's an important day for them to be able to hear that what they have been saying all along has validity and that they are being believed.
For many, an uplifting moment in an arduous reckoning for Indigenous people and all Canadians that is far from over. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
A 24-hour crisis line is available to support residential school survivors. It's toll-free, and you can speak in confidence. The number is 1-800-721-0066. Turning to Ukraine, peace talks with Russia have resumed, but neither side is making it easy. Russia is accusing Ukraine of attacking an oil depot within its borders, and a convoy of Red Cross vehicles trying to get stranded civilians out of the besieged city of Mariupol has again been denied entry. As Redmond Shannon reports, hopes of any firm ceasefire are fading.
A barrage of rockets hitting an oil depot in Belgorod, Russia, not far from the Ukrainian border, followed by 2 helicopters. Russia claims Ukraine is to blame for what would be a first attack of this war on Russian soil.
They just reflect the real intention of the Ukrainian side and the real intention for any peace talk.
Initially, Ukraine did not deny involvement.
I can neither confirm nor reject the claim that Ukraine was involved in this.
Later, a Kyiv security official said it wasn't them. Whoever is to blame, it won't help fragile peace talks which resumed online on Friday. In the south, more bad news for the people of besieged Mariupol.
We are currently on the move from Zaporizhzhia to go to Mariupol.
This Red Cross convoy was forced to turn around as it tried to get access to the city to escort a convoy of evacuees to safety.
time is running out for the people of Mariupol. They are desperately in need of assistance. We are running out of adjectives to describe the horrors that residents in Mariupol have suffered.
Ukraine says 3,000 people still managed to escape the city Friday. The Red Cross says it will try again on Saturday, but that Russia won't allow them to bring aid in. In Kyiv, a visit from the European Parliament President.
This is the whatever it takes moments.
Just after Ukraine's leader Volodymyr Zelensky shored up his own ranks, firing 2 generals, labelling them traitors. The EU also courted China at a summit on Friday.
China should, if not support, at least not interfere with our sanctions.
As Russia's foreign minister met with his Indian counterpart, China and India, 2 Asian powers who remain somewhat on the fence in this widening global divide. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
On the outskirts of Kyiv, thousands of volunteers are working to defend the city from Russian forces. So far, they've succeeded, with Russia claiming it's scaling back military operations around the capital. That has allowed Kyiv residents to return home. Jeff Semple has more on how they're trying to get life back to normal.
From the first moments of Russia's invasion, Ukraine's capital has found itself in the crosshairs.
First day, we were hiding in nearest metro station. I was in panic.
When Russia attacked Kyiv in late February, Kristina Malnik and her boyfriend fled her home city for the relative safety of Lviv in western Ukraine. But they recently decided to return to the capital and were prepared for the worst.
I remember I said to my boyfriend that if I'll die in next second, that will be okay, because I'm in my home.
But instead of death, Christine arrived to find her city springing back to life.
Alive, much more alive.
After weeks of trying to claim the Ukrainian capital, Russia appears to be pulling back, to an extent, refocusing some of its forces to the east. Ukraine just recaptured this suburb north of Kyiv and is rapidly pressing forward. Every day we are liberating more villages and territories, this Ukrainian commander told Global News. The situation here is getting better. But the battle for Kyiv isn't over yet. Volunteers have been digging these trenches by hand in various locations right across the capital to help them fortify their positions and push the Russians back. This is Kyiv's last line of defense. A network of trenches carved through the capital, dug by members of Ukraine's Territorial Defense Forces. Not soldiers, but civilians who volunteered to fight, including this Ukrainian Canadian.
And then you realize that freedom isn't free. It comes at a cost.
Dan Bilak is from Toronto and moved to Ukraine back in the 90s. The corporate lawyer is now conducting night patrols on the outskirts of Kyiv, so Ukraine's soldiers can focus on the fight. He's one of more than 100,000 Ukrainian military volunteers.
It showed how powerful it can be to harness the enthusiasm of people and the commitment and the resolution of people to defend their land. We're in fact winning this war because of the fact that we have this kind of a setup.
At least in central Kyiv, the sweet smell of victory is in the air. For the first time in a month, this high-end restaurant is serving customers, and its head chef is smiling.
I'm happy because I feel like I'm at home.
As of Friday, businesses are allowed to start selling alcohol again. Ukrainians toasting to a homecoming some thought they'd never see.
I don't think anybody's under any illusions that this is done. I think we've proven that we can defeat this enemy.
This city is still within range of rockets and artillery. But many see this resumption of some semblance of normal life as a show of defiance. This coffee shop closed after Russia's invasion, but just reopened and rebranded. Kyiv is now spelt with a Y instead of the traditional Soviet spelling. Because we are Ukraine, she says. The war rages on, but they hope the battle for the capital is nearly done. Jeff Semple, Global News, Kyiv.
Ukrainian MPs on a mission in Ottawa. Coming up, what they're asking Canada to provide to help fight Russia. Plus, waterworks, new funding to fix one of Iqaluit's biggest problems. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced funding to help fix Iqaluit's water system, which has been contaminated with fuel twice in the last 6 months. The federal government is setting aside $214 million to build a new reservoir and upgrade the city's existing water supply system. The work is expected to be completed within 4 years. Iqaluit's 8,000 residents were unable to drink from the tap for nearly 2 months last year and spent 6 days under a boil water advisory in January. 5 Ukrainian MPs are in Ottawa pushing for swift and concrete action to fight the war against Russia. They sat down with the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland to request more financial and military support.
We cannot do this with rifles. We have to have heavy weaponry to kick Russians from our territory. Because if we talk about the end of this war, we mean winning in this war. Because other than that, Putin will not stop.
The MPs are requesting Canadian tanks or funds to buy them elsewhere. They'd also like to see more sanctions. Standing their ground, still ahead, Ukrainian civilians taking up arms against Russia's invasion. Ukraine has surprised the world with its ability to push back against the Russian invasion. It's people fighting the war on every front. Well, earlier we told you about the Civilian Defense Force. This week, for the new reality, Krista Hesse gives us a rare inside look at Kyiv's territorial defense, a force made up almost entirely of untrained civilians doing whatever it takes to protect their homeland.
Huddled inside a bomb shelter in Kyiv, dozens of volunteers prepare Molotov cocktails. They stuff pieces of styrofoam into bottles, which will act as a thickening agent. When mixed with gasoline, it makes these DIY weapons all the more deadly. But the effort to defend Ukraine's capital goes far beyond homemade bombs.
I'm wearing the military protection. It's very unusual for me.
Oleksiy Honcharuk is still getting used to the gear and the Kalashnikov. He's not just any civilian. He's a former Ukrainian prime minister, the youngest ever to have the job. But these days, he's a soldier. He and his team conduct aerial intelligence from this secret location in Kyiv.
We need to find an enemy, to control their movements, and to make sure that we understand their logic, to make sure that we understand their tactic and strategy.
Our cameras got rare access to the operations nerve center, where they monitor aerial activity and work to outwit the Russians. So far, it appears to be working. It's been 5 weeks since the invasion, and Russia has failed to capture any major city. But relentless bombing has left many of them in ruin.
So they can't take control over Kyiv, but they can destroy a huge part of it.
Krista Hesse, Global News.
And for more on Krista's look inside Kyiv's Territorial Defense Force, watch The New Reality tomorrow night at 8, right here on Global. Next, the BC tourist experience that goes a lot deeper than sightseeing and souvenirs. Indigenous tourism is becoming a big draw card and an unexpected benefit supporting truth and reconciliation by educating people about Canada's historic rights and wrongs, including the residential school system's failures. As Mike Drolet explains, Indigenous tourism is providing opportunities to share and reconnect with Indigenous culture.
There's no denying the beauty of the Klahoose First Nation north of Vancouver. On any given day, you can see grizzly bears and whales in their own habitats. And that's a huge draw for tourists. But the Indigenous team that runs the Klahoose Wilderness Resort says their guests expect more.
It's traveling with intention. They're coming with the intention of having that connection with the people that live there.
It's called Indigenous Culture Tourism, an immersive experience which Chris Tate says is more authentic. What's odd is that market research done by the Indigenous Tourism Association found that Canadians are visiting in part because of the residential school tragedies.
Yeah, in a weird way, that's absolutely what happened. And it's continuing to happen.
Whether from guilt or support for reconciliation, Indigenous tourism will take the boost in business. Last year, the industry brought in only a third of pre-pandemic revenues. The Tourism Association is asking the federal government to bet on them in the next budget so they can grow the experiential market, which in turn would create jobs and help their communities thrive.
We see culture dying across the country for many nations, unfortunately. The language is being lost. But when young people see that this is an industry where you can actually embrace the culture, embrace the language, embrace your traditions, your regalia wearing, the events, the festivals, these are things we're saving.
And they see inviting strangers to see it firsthand as an opportunity.
We want the world to come see how Indigenous values are so that they can hopefully learn from that.
Provided, of course, that they can tell the stories of how they came to be themselves. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Friday. I'm Colleen Christie. The road to reconciliation remains long for residential school survivors and their families, but with the Pope's apology, there's no question the journey for Canada's Indigenous peoples has taken an historic step forward. We leave you tonight with the power of the very language and culture residential schools aim to destroy. Indigenous songs, speech, and dance rang through the Vatican today for all the world to see. Thanks for watching.